Cowboy ate Christmas dinner alone until native woman arrived and whispered, "Can you buy cookies?" The snow had been falling since morning, slow and quiet, covering the small town like a soft blanket. Christmas lights hung on poles in shop windows, blinking red and yellow, but the streets were nearly empty. Most people were inside warm homes, laughing with family, sharing food and opening gifts. The cold wind moved through the town like it had nowhere else to go. At the far end of Main Street stood an old diner. It had been there for decades, long before the town changed. The sign outside flickered a little, but the lights inside were warm. A bell rang softly when the door opened or closed, though tonight it barely made a sound because almost no one came in. Inside the diner, a cowboy sat alone in a booth near the window. He was in his late 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face shaped by years of sun, dust, and long days outdoors. His hat rested beside him on the seat, worn at the edges. His coat was thick but old, and his boots carried dried mud from the ranch where he worked. He held his fork slowly, not rushing his meal, as if time had stopped just for him. In front of him was a simple Christmas dinner: turkey slices, mashed potatoes, gravy, and a small piece of bread. The plate looked full, but the table felt empty. Across from him was another seat, untouched, clean, and silent. He had come to the diner because he had nowhere else to go. Years ago, Christmas had meant something different. It had meant noise, people, and warmth, but life had a way of changing quietly. One by one, people drifted away. Some moved, some passed on. Some became memories that hurt too much to think about for long. The ranch kept him busy most days, but holidays were different. Work slowed down, and silence grew louder. The radio behind the counter played soft Christmas music. The waitress, an older woman who had known him for years, moved slowly between tables, wiping surfaces that were already clean. She gave him a gentle smile earlier, the kind that said she understood without asking questions. She didn't talk much tonight. Neither did he. The cowboy looked out the window as he chewed. Snowflakes landed on the glass, melting into tiny drops. Across the street, a family hurried into a car, laughing, their breath visible in the cold air. He watched them for a moment, then looked back down at his plate. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even sad in a loud way. It was a quiet feeling, deep and heavy, like something settled in his chest and refused to move. He had learned to live with it. Some days were easier than others. Christmas was harder. He remembered when he used to wear a cleaner shirt on this day, when he used to sit at a table that was too small for all the dishes, when someone would remind him to slow down while eating. Those days felt far away now, like stories from another life. He took a sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter, but it warmed his hands. Outside, the sky had already turned dark, even though it was still early evening. The town felt smaller at night, especially on holidays. A couple sat at the far end of the diner, quietly sharing a slice of pie. They spoke in low voices and leaned close to each other. The cowboy didn't stare. He just noticed, the way lonely people notice things without meaning to. He finished half his plate and pushed it slightly away. He wasn't very hungry anymore. He never was on days like this. He came for the routine, for the feeling of being somewhere that was open, somewhere that expected nothing from him. The diner smelled like coffee, food, and old wood. It was familiar, comforting in a simple way. The waitress walked over and asked if he wanted anything else. Her voice was kind but careful, as if she didn't want to disturb his thoughts. So he shook his head and thanked her. She nodded and moved away, leaving him alone again. The cowboy leaned back slightly and crossed his arms. His eyes drifted around the room, then back to the window. Snow was falling harder now. The streetlights made it sparkle, like tiny stars dropping from the sky. He thought about the ranch, about the horses settled in their stalls, about the quiet fields covered in white. Work would start again, soon enough. It always did. Work was easier than days like this. Animals didn't ask questions. Land didn't judge. He checked his watch. It was still early, but the diner would close soon. He wondered where he would go afterward. Probably back to his small house on the edge of town. He would turn on the radio, maybe heat something simple, and wait for the day to pass. The bell above the diner door suddenly rang. The sound was small, but it cut through the quiet like a sharp note. The cowboy lifted his head without thinking. The waitress looked up too. A woman stepped inside. She paused just past the door, brushing snow from her coat. The cold air followed her in for a moment before the door closed behind her. She stood there, unsure, as if she wasn't certain she belonged. She was native, with dark hair pulled back and a face marked by both strength and tiredness. Her clothes were clean but worn, and her boots were damp from walking through the snow. She held her hands together, rubbing them slightly to warm them. The diner felt different with her there. Not louder, just changed. The cowboy watched quietly from his booth. He didn't know why his attention stayed on her. Maybe it was the way she looked around the room, careful and respectful. Maybe it was the way she seemed alone, too. The waitress smiled and greeted her, pointing to a table. The woman nodded but didn't move right away. She looked at the menu, then at the prices, then back down again. Something in her posture showed hesitation, as if she was measuring her choices. The cowboy looked back at his plate, unsure why he felt a tightness in his chest. He told himself it was nothing. Just another stranger on another cold night. Still, he slowed his movements, taking his time as if something unseen was about to happen. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the diner hummed softly with warmth, music, and the quiet presence of people who, for different reasons, were not at home this Christmas. The cowboy picked up his fork again and took another bite. He didn't know it yet, but this simple, lonely dinner was about to become something he would remember for the rest of his life. The woman finally moved from the doorway and walked slowly toward an empty table near the middle of the diner. Her steps were careful, almost quiet, as if she did not want to disturb anyone. The waitress followed her, placing a menu on the table and offering a polite smile. The woman returned the smile but did not open the menu right away. She sat with her hands resting in her lap, shoulders slightly tense, eyes lowered. The cowboy noticed all of this without trying to. He told himself again that it was none of his business. Still, his eyes kept drifting back to her table. Something about her presence felt heavy, like she carried a long road behind her. The diner remained calm. Christmas music played softly, and the smell of warm food filled the air. Outside, snow continued to fall, thick and steady now. Cars passed less often, and the town seemed to settle into a deep winter quiet. The waitress returned to the counter, giving the woman time to decide. The cowboy took another sip of his coffee. It had cooled slightly, but he didn't mind. His dinner plate sat almost untouched now. He had lost interest in eating. The woman finally picked up the menu. She studied it slowly, her eyes moving from item to item. Every few seconds she paused, as if doing quiet math in her head. The cowboy recognized that look. He had worn it himself many times in the past. It was the look of choosing carefully, not because of taste, but because of limits. A few minutes passed. The waitress came back and asked gently what she would like. The woman hesitated, then asked for a cup of hot water. Her voice was soft but clear. The waitress nodded, not showing surprise, and walked away. The cowboy shifted slightly in his seat. He stared at the table in front of him, then at the window, then back toward the woman again. The hot water arrived, and the woman wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth sink in. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if the heat alone was a small gift. The couple at the far end of the diner paid their bill and left, their laughter fading as the door closed behind them. The diner grew even quieter. Now there were only 3 people inside: the cowboy, the woman, and the waitress. The woman opened the menu again, but still did not order. She glanced toward the counter, then toward the cowboy's table, then quickly looked away. Her shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. The cowboy felt a strange pull in his chest. He didn't like it. Feelings like that usually led to memories he tried not to visit. He reminded himself that he came here for peace, not trouble. Still, his eyes stayed alert. Time passed. The waitress wiped the counter, stacking clean cups. The radio played another holiday song. Snow tapped gently against the windows. Finally, the woman stood up. She picked up her coat, hesitated, then took a step forward. The cowboy watched her from the corner of his eye. She did not head toward the door. Instead, she walked slowly toward his booth. He sat up straighter without thinking. His heart beat a little faster, though he couldn't say why. She stopped a few feet away, standing beside the empty seat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Up close, he could see that her face showed signs of long days outdoors. Her eyes were dark and tired, but steady. There was something calm about her, something grounded. She leaned in slightly, keeping her voice low, almost a whisper, as if she did not want anyone else to hear. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm sorry to bother you." The cowboy shook his head quickly. "You're fine," he said. His voice sounded rougher than he meant it to. She took a breath. Her hands tightened together for a second, then relaxed. "Can you buy cookies?" she asked softly. The words hung between them. The cowboy blanked, surprised. He had expected many things, but not that. Not money directly. Not food for herself, just cookies. Simple, small, almost harmless. He looked at her, trying to understand. His mind raced for a second, then slowed. He noticed the careful way she stood, the way she didn't look demanding or desperate, just hopeful. "Cookies?" he repeated quietly. She nodded. "Yes." Just cookies. He glanced at the counter where a glass jar of fresh cookies sat near the register. He had seen it 100 times before. He never paid it much attention. Sure, he said, before he could think too hard about it. The word came out naturally, like it had been waiting. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. Relief crossed her face, quick and controlled. Thank you, she said. I didn't know who else to ask. The cowboy slid out of his booth and stood up. His knees felt stiff, but he ignored it. He walked to the counter, reached into his pocket, and placed a few bills on the surface. The waitress looked at him, then at the woman, then back at him again. She nodded, understanding more than words could explain. She filled a small bag with cookies and handed it to him. He turned and handed the bag to the woman. She accepted it carefully, as if it was something fragile. Thank you, she said again. Her voice carried more weight this time. She did not leave right away. Instead, she looked at the empty seat across from him. May I sit? She asked. He hesitated for half a second. Then he nodded. Yeah, go ahead. For a moment, neither of them reached for the bag. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and silent. Inside, the diner felt warmer than before. She opened the bag and took one cookie, breaking it in half. She offered a piece toward him. You should have won, she said. He shook his head at first, then smiled faintly and took it. The cookie was warm and soft. They ate quietly for a few seconds. The cowboy realized something strange. The empty seat across from him didn't feel empty anymore. Traveling? He asked gently. She nodded. Yes, a long way. He had learned that some stories came out on their own and others needed time. The waitress watched them from behind the counter, her expression thoughtful. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the wall, letting the moment be. The cowboy felt something shift inside him. Not a big change, just a small one. Like a door opening that had been closed for too long. He looked at the woman across from him, sitting in the quiet warmth of the diner, sharing cookies on Christmas night. For the first time that evening, he felt something other than loneliness. They sat facing each other, the small bag of cookies between them like a quiet bridge. The diner felt different now. The air seemed warmer, and the silence no longer felt heavy. The cowboy leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the table. The woman held her half-cookie carefully, taking small bites as if she wanted it to last. For a while, neither of them spoke. There was no pressure to fill the space. The soft music from the radio and the gentle sound of the heater were enough. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in calm white layers. The cowboy finally broke the silence. You said you're traveling, he said, keeping his voice low and easy. That can't be simple this time of year. She nodded slowly. It isn't, she replied, but sometimes waiting isn't an option. Instead, he nodded, letting her words settle. He knew that feeling too well. Life often moved whether a person was ready or not. She looked around the diner for a moment, then back at him. You're pursuing to help a stranger, she said. Not everyone is. Didn't seem like a big thing. She gave a small smile. Sometimes small things are the biggest. That thought stayed with him. He stared at the table, then at the cookie in his hand. He realized he had almost finished his dinner without tasting it, but he had enjoyed the cookie more than the whole meal. My name's Thomas, he said after a pause. He hadn't planned to say it. It just felt right. She nodded. I'm Aina. The way she said her name was calm and steady, like she was used to carrying it with pride. Thomas repeated it once, quietly, so he would remember. They ate another cookie each. The bag was already half empty, but neither of them seemed to mind. It wasn't about how much there was. Thomas glanced toward the counter. You want something warm to eat? He asked. I can... No, she said kindly. The cookies are enough for now. He respected the way she spoke, clear, polite, and firm without being cold. Ayana folded her hands on the table. I don't usually ask people for help, she said. But tonight, I felt like I should. Thomas listened. He didn't interrupt. He had learned long ago that listening was sometimes more helpful than fixing things. I've been on the road for a while, she continued, trying to get back to family. It's not far now, but it feels far. Holidays make distance feel longer. She smiled faintly. Yes, they do. The waitress came by quietly and refilled Thomas's coffee. She glanced at Ayana's empty cup and brought her another without being asked. Ayana thanked her, her voice warm. The waitress moved away again, leaving them to their quiet corner of the diner. I work on a ranch outside town, he said. Been there most of my life. That's a long time, Ayana said. Feels longer some days, he replied. Not bitter, just honest. Work keeps me busy, keeps my mind quiet. She studied him for a moment. And tonight? Tonight's different. She didn't push him to explain. Instead, she nodded as if she understood without words. The radio played a song about home. Thomas noticed it, and so did Ayanna. They both smiled slightly at the timing. "You're alone tonight," she said gently. "So are you," he replied. She looked down at her hands. Yes, the word carried weight, but not shame. Just truth. They finished the cookies slowly. When the bag was empty, Ayanna folded it neatly and placed it beside her plate. "I'll remember this," she said. "Not just the food. The kindness." Thomas felt something tighten in his chest again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt warm, like a quiet fire starting. "You didn't have to thank me," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. They sat in silence again, but it felt shared now, not lonely. Outside, the snow began to slow. Streetlights glowed softly, and the town seemed to breathe easier. Ayanna looked at the clock on the wall. "I should go soon," she said. "I don't want to walk too late." "You walking?" "Yes," she said. "Just a little way. It's cold out there." She smiled gently. "I'm used to cold." He stood up slowly. "Let me at least walk you to the door." They stood together near the entrance. The bell rang softly as he held the door open for her. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. She paused on the step, then turned back toward him. "Thank you again, Thomas," she said, "for seeing me." He hadn't realized how often he felt unseen himself. "Take care," he said quietly. She stepped into the snow, pulling her coat tighter, and walked down the street until her shape blended into the falling light. Thomas stood there for a moment longer, watching the empty street. Then he returned to his booth and sat down. The diner felt quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. A better one. He finished his coffee, paid his bill, and pulled on his coat. I haven't spotted to be... And Thomas carried that feeling with him into the snow, knowing this night would stay with him long after the tracks outside disappeared. The cold night wrapped around Thomas as he stepped out of the diner. Snow crunched under his boots, and his breath turned into small clouds in the air. The street was quiet now, almost too quiet, as if the town itself had gone to sleep. He stood there for a moment, hands in his coat pockets, staring down the road where Ayanna had disappeared. He didn't know why he stayed still for so long. Maybe he was afraid that if he moved, the feeling inside him would fade, or maybe he was just trying to understand what had happened. Nothing big had taken place. No long speeches, no promises. Just cookies, a conversation, and a shared silence. Yet it felt important. Thomas finally turned and walked toward his truck parked near the edge of the street. The old engine started with a familiar sound, rough but reliable. As he drove, the town lights passed by slowly. Houses glowed warmly through windows. Shadows of people moved inside, busy with their own lives. For once, those sights didn't hurt as much as they usually did. When he reached his small house outside town, he parked and sat in the truck for a moment before getting out. Snow had already covered the path leading to his door. He walked carefully, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. He hung his coat, set his hat on the table, and turned on a small lamp. The soft light filled the room, pushing back the darkness. He poured himself a glass of water and sat down in the chair near the window. His thoughts returned to Ayanna. He wondered where she was going, if she was warm enough, if she would reach her family safely. He wondered how long she had been traveling and how many nights she had spent like this one, moving quietly through the world. Thomas leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. Memories came without warning. Old Christmas mornings. A crowded table. Laughter. Someone calling his name. He had learned to push those memories away most days, but tonight they didn't hurt as much. They felt softer, like they were reminding him of something he had forgotten. Kindness, maybe. The next morning, the world looked fresh under the snow. Thomas woke early, as he always did. Breakfast, and stepped outside. The cold air felt sharp, but clean. He loaded feed into his truck and headed to the ranch. Work went on as usual. The horses needed care. Fences needed checking. Life didn't pause, even after a meaningful night. Still, Thomas noticed small changes in himself. He greeted people more easily. He paused to listen when someone spoke. He found himself watching the road more than usual. Days passed. Christmas came and went. The town returned to its normal rhythm. Snow melted slowly, leaving wet ground behind. Thomas kept busy, but his thoughts often drifted back to the diner. One evening after work, he stopped by again. The diner looked the same as always. Same sign, same warmth, same smell of coffee and food. The waitress smiled when she saw him and asked if he wanted his usual. He nodded and took his seat near the window. As he ate, his eyes moved toward the door every time it opened. He told himself it was silly. He didn't expect to see Ayana again. Life didn't usually work that way. But still, he kept looking. The waitress came by and refilled his coffee. "You seem distracted," she said gently. He smiled a little. "Just thinking." She nodded. "That happens more than people admit." He laughed quietly at that. When he finished his meal, he stood up and walked to the counter to pay. As he reached for his wallet, his eyes fell on the cookie jar. It was full, just like always. Without thinking too much about it, he paid for a bag of cookies and left them on the counter. "For whoever needs them," he said. The waitress raised her eyebrows, surprised but pleased. "That's kind of you," he shrugged. "Just feels right." Every time Thomas came to the diner, he paid for cookies and left them behind. Sometimes the waitress told him who took them. A tired traveler, a young person waiting for a ride, someone down on their luck. Sometimes she didn't know who took them at all. Thomas didn't ask questions. It wasn't about knowing. It was about giving. Weeks turned into months. Winter slowly gave way to early spring. Snow disappeared completely, replaced by soft grass and muddy roads. Life moved forward. One afternoon, Thomas finished work early and decided to take a walk through town. He passed the diner, the post office, and a small store near the edge of Main Street. As he walked, he noticed someone sitting on a bench near the store. It was Ayan. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. Then she looked up and met his eyes. They both froze. She stood up slowly, a surprised smile spreading across her face. "Thomas?" she said, as if she wasn't sure it was real. He walked toward her, his heart beating faster. "Ayana," he replied. They stood facing each other, both smiling now, the moment quiet and full. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said honestly. "I wasn't sure either," she replied, "but I came back through town. I wanted to." They talked about simple things at first. The weather, the road, work, family. There was no rush. No pressure. Ayana told him she had made it home safely that Christmas. She had stayed for a while, helping family, resting, finding her strength again. Now she was traveling for work, moving where she was needed. Thomas listened closely, glad just to hear her voice. They stopped near the diner without planning to. It felt natural. Inside, the waitress looked up and smiled wide when she saw them together. "You found each other," she said warmly. Thomas and Ayana shared a look, then laughed softly. They sat at the same booth as before. Cookies appeared on the table, fresh and warm. This time, they didn't need to ask. As they talked, Thomas realized something important. That night on Christmas hadn't just changed one evening. It had changed how he saw the world, how he saw himself. He wasn't just a man passing time anymore. He was someone who could make a difference, even in small ways. Ayana looked at him across the table. "That night mattered," she said quietly. "To both of us." It did. They sat there, sharing cookies and stories, knowing that some moments were meant to return, not to repeat, but to grow. And in that small diner, surrounded by ordinary sounds and simple warmth, two lives continued forward, no longer alone and no longer unchanged. A spring slowly settled into the town, bringing softer air and longer days. The trees along Main Street began to show small green buds, and the ground that had once been hard with cold turned gentle again. Life moved forward in quiet, steady ways. After that afternoon at the diner, Thomas and Ayana stayed in touch. They did not rush anything. Some days they met for coffee. Other days they only exchanged a few words when passing through town. There was comfort in knowing the other was nearby, living their own life, walking their own path. Thomas returned to his routines at the ranch, but they no longer felt heavy. Work still tired his body, but his mind felt lighter. He noticed the sky more. He noticed how the horses reacted to his calm. He found himself smiling for no clear reason. Ayana stayed in town longer than she planned. She found temporary work helping at a community center just outside town. People respected her quiet strength. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her words carried meaning. Children trusted her easily. Elders welcomed her presence. Sometimes, after long days, she and Thomas would walk together near the edge of town where the land opened wide. They talked about the past without being trapped by it. They talked about the present with honesty. They talked about the future carefully, without fear. One evening, they sat on a wooden fence, watching the sun lower behind the hills. The sky turned soft orange and pink. "I used to think kindness was something people ran out of," Thomas said quietly, "like it had limits." Ayana looked at him. It grows when it's shared, she replied, just like denying, knowing she was right. The diner remained their quiet place. It became a spot where conversation slowed and the world felt manageable. The waitress noticed the change in Thomas long before he did himself. He laughed more. He listened better. He stayed longer. One night, a young traveler came into the diner, tired and unsure. Thomas noticed the same hesitation he had once seen in Ayana. Without thinking, he paid for a warm meal and left quietly. He didn't need thanks. He understood now that kindness wasn't about recognition. Ayana watched us from across the room. She didn't say anything, but her eyes softened. Summer came gently. Fields turned green, and the town grew livelier. Thomas and Ayana continued walking side by side, never forcing labels onto what they shared. It was enough to be present. One afternoon, Ayana told him she would be leaving again soon. Work was calling her elsewhere. Thomas felt the familiar ache rise in his chest, but this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like movement. "I'm glad I found you," he said honestly. "I'm glad too," she replied. "You reminded me that kindness still lives in quiet places." On her last evening in town, they went to the diner one final time. They sat in the same booth. Cookies sat between them, warm and simple. "This place changed everything," Thomas said. "No," Ayana replied gently. "You did." They shared a smile filled with understanding. When the time came, Thomas walked her to the edge of town. They stood there as the road stretched ahead. "Wherever you go," she said, "keep doing what you do." He nodded. "And you keep asking questions that matter." She laughed softly and stepped onto the road, turning once to wave before continuing forward. Thomas watched until she disappeared, just like that snowy night months before. But this time, the quiet didn't hurt. He turned back toward town with steady steps. Life continued. Seasons changed. Thomas kept paying for cookies. He kept noticing people. He kept showing up. And every Christmas after that, he returned to the diner, not because he was alone, but because he remembered a night when two strangers shared warmth, and a simple question opened a door neither knew they needed. That memory stayed with him, strong and steady, reminding him that even the smallest moments can change a life forever.